Hello, everybody, and welcome to Step Up Savannah's panel discussion on the importance of the upcoming Georgia primary election. This primary is in what is called a midterm year, occurring in the middle of the presidential term. These midterms generally have lower turnouts than presidential election years, and primaries generally have lower turnout than the general election in November. So with all that in mind, why should we care enough about the May primary to vote? The assembled panel will address this question head on. We've gathered community leaders representing organizations involved in voter education and advocacy to explain the purpose of the primary, why participating is valuable and important, and why primaries should not be overlooked by everyday Georgians. They will also cover topics related to voting, like the policy changes implemented in Georgia in response to the 2020 election, what to expect when you go vote, who is eligible to vote, and how you can still vote early. We've got a few different members here today. I'm going to just start with sort of alphabetically here with Miss Alicia Johnson, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and your organization.
Hi, my name is Alicia Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of Step Up Savannah. And Step Up Savannah work is focused around economic inclusion for low wealth communities of color.
And Miss Amanda Hollowell.
Hello, my name is Amanda Hollowell. I'm the National Organizing Director for When We All Vote, which is a national organization that encourages the everyday person to vote and to also be a registered voter and leading in their community.
Miss Coco Pappy.
Hey y'all, I'm Coco Pappy. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Deep Center. We are a Savannah-based organization that works with youth and adults in both the school district and also the justice system.
And Miss Shirley James.
Good evening, good afternoon rather. I'm Shirley James, and wearing two hats. I'm actually publisher of the Savannah Tribune, which is an African-American weekly newspaper originally founded in 1875. And I also work very, very passionately with Get Out to Vote and with few organizations, a voter empowerment group, coalition, but more specifically now with Black Voters Matter through my church, St. Philip AME Church on the Boulevard, which is one of the Black Voters Matter partners here in Savannah.
Excellent. Thank you everybody for being here. We're going to get right into it with some open questions for really anybody here to take. And I really do want to take it all the way back to sort of your high school or middle school days. Just let me know, what is a primary election?
Okay,
Who wants to take it?
I'll give it a try. A primary election, piggybacking on what you said in the introduction, is basically that time during a midterm of a general election. And sometimes they could be local elections, but in this particular case this year, this is a midterm for a national election. And during the primary is when you're actually looking at a slate of candidates who are vying for the position to become one of the main candidates that you would consider in the general election. So now we are sort of like in the process with Republicans, with Democrats, with with the Libertarians, of trying to look at the different persons, candidates in each of those parties. We're trying to be the person that surfaces to the top so that come November, we can look at that one person who's there, and one or two, however it comes out, that will be the main candidate that we will be looking at to make the final decision for. And the other thing about a primary and a midterm, especially now, is that it usually happens halfway through the term of, say, the President of the United States. So that is the period of time when Congress seats will change. And as you know, and hopefully we all know, and some of us don't know and are not taught as we were when I was coming along, in reference to civics and how government works. So a lot of us don't understand how government works in reference to who makes decisions about what, about the three branches of government, et cetera, et cetera. So without having that knowledge, I think some of that leads to persons not really being that interested in what primary elections are all about.
I think it's also, to Ms. James, to your point about us getting to select, right, partisan candidates or from a pool of partisan candidates. One of the things that I think often gets overlooked that in a primary election is that we have more partisan voters show out and show up, unfortunately not in, some of our low wealth communities, but that's how in those primary elections, more extreme candidates get on our ballots who are, maybe far away from one policy position, so far away from one policy position or another that directly impacts our community. And so it becomes increasingly important to show up for those primary elections, because we're selecting, as you mentioned, Ms. James, from that pool of candidates, and we in our country and in our politics want to, when we're talking about primary elections and primary candidates, we want to stay off the extreme fringes of our society.
Yeah, so that sort of leads into my next question. How would you respond to somebody who says that they're an independent, so the primary doesn't matter to them?
So I think I kind of want to address that, but I want to take a step back a little bit, because I think what it makes me think about is specifically like voter apathy and sort of the idea of like, how do you engage the apathetic voter? And for me, I would really like us to sort of challenge our ideas on what voter apathy is. Frankly, I think that it feels like a very bootstraps narrative that those in power have put out there to place blame on individuals rather than a system that's sort of designed to like not work for some folks. And so when we talk about that, we ignore like a 200+ year of voter suppression history and blame individuals rather than institutions and politicians and electoral process that makes it hard and if not seemingly meaningless to vote, right? And that specifically, yes, that relates to someone who might say, I don't see value in voting for this, but it does feel very, very linked. And I feel like a way to get around that is building on the crucial work that has been happening, not only in this community, but in communities all across the nation. And instead of browbeating folks at election time, how we encourage people and engage people so that they're political and civically involved year round. And oftentimes that means meeting people's needs first before asking them for that vote. Yeah, so I think that to me feels like a really natural place to at least start having that conversation.
I also want to follow up to that to say that like, it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of your like political affiliation, there's an opportunity for you to vote for everything, either at the local election, which a lot of times is nonpartisan, even all the way up to the state and government. And so like, even in this midterm election here in Georgia, you can actually request a Republican, a Democratic, or a nonpartisan ballot. And those nonpartisan ballots or independent ballots or whatever you say will have those elections that are not decided by parties, right? And so I don't ever want us to ever like pin ourselves with a label that discourages us from participating in democracy.
And to your point, Amanda, about the labels, I think that because we've seen the rise of so much disinformation and identity politics, where we are forcing people into categories that often end up disenfranchising them from the process and layering on that disinformation, to your point, I think it's important for us to let people know that, right? To let people feel empowered throughout the process, and that there is strategic awareness. And what I mean by that, to both you and Coco's point, that strategic awareness is about giving people the power to make a choice.
So that's great. And again, it's sort of all building into the next question, things that I wanted to talk about, sort of the format of these elections that are coming up, because from my understanding, it's not just a primary election. Amanda, you had sort of mentioned that there's this nonpartisan election. So if you want to talk about, or if anybody want to talk about sort of what is actually going to be on your ballot when you show up to vote, it's going to be more than just selecting party candidates. There's actual immediately consequential elections on this. So if anybody would like to speak on that, I welcome you to do so.
Well, I'd like to maybe get started with that, because in addition to the partisan side of it, because in Georgia, even though with this election you can select a Democrat, a Republican, or a nonpartisan ballot, if you go with Democrat or Republican, the nonpartisan candidates are also there. And what we need to help our constituents and our citizens and persons understand is that those nonpartisan candidates are very critical in reference to who they are and what it is that they do. Usually the nonpartisan candidates are judges. So you're looking at our justice system. And they're also persons in this particular case, especially here in Chatham County, there are also persons who will represent us on our school board president. And then it's during the primary and the midterm elections where you will also elect, depending on which district you're in, you will be selecting your representative to the school board. Now the school board positions are not up for election each election term. So you will elect some of those 8 persons this time, I think about half of them, and then the next time we have an election will be the other half. So you're not having just a full transition or transformation of your school board at one time, but that's local. And when you think about your school board, that affects not only our children, whether you physically have children who are in the school system or not, but you're talking about the whole educational system and how it impacts our area, our city, our county, in reference to the quality of education that our children are going to get. You're also impacting the teachers, the administrators. You're looking at how state monies are appropriated and how you're using them on the local level. So there's a lot in terms of how those persons affect the educational system here in the city. And then when you look at the judges, we're electing judges not only at the state level, state Supreme Court level, but all the way down to Court of Appeals and even to the Recorder's Court here, which is local. So we're talking about having equity in the justice system. Then you really have to look at who these judges are, what it is that, we say platforms, but what do they represent? Are you really looking into who they are? And a lot of times we only have one judge that's running for a particular position. And usually that's the incumbent. Well, how did that incumbent get there? Was that incumbent appointed by the governor? Or was that incumbent elected? In the state of Georgia, we are supposed to be able to elect our judges. That doesn't always happen in reference to the first time the judge is able to hold that seat. So there's still a lot of education that has to go on. But I think if we concentrate on helping persons to understand those positions are very important because they do affect our everyday lives, every day, educationally and from a justice point of view.
Yeah, I really, first off, it's very hard to follow Ms. James, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say that, like, let's just all like take that in. But I think the point about, you know, these are incredibly important positions that do impact the everyday quality of your life, right? And at DEEP, we see that all the time at the intersection of education and the justice system. The recorder's court, you know, here in Savannah, that's oftentimes people's first sort of impact with the justice system that we see, specifically with quality of life offenses, right? So we're talking about like jaywalking or disorderly conduct, you know, camping on public property, offenses that are directly linked to poverty, to homelessness, to addiction, to mental health, right? And so when we're thinking about the type of person that we want sitting behind a bench, does that person understand that in their core, right? What is their opinion on our current bond schedule? Do they see room for improvement? Do they think it's totally fine as is? What is their position just on misdemeanor offenses in general? What is the opportunity for community service over sentencing, right? So there's all these really important questions. And I think also too, just one of the best things that I can recommend is like, all of these candidates have Facebook pages. Go to their Facebook pages and see how they talk about public safety. It's real. I think that to me, that feels incredibly important. Are you using crime as like a stick and as a scare tactic, or are you talking about public safety where it's rooted at, right? Which is in people's needs. And the same goes with the school board election, right? Yes, this is nonpartisan, but like, you know, people's values show up in the way that they talk about what they want to bring to this position, right? You know, if say you were a school board president, do you support vouchers, right? So school choice, do you believe that it is okay that the state of Georgia takes money from the K through 12 budget and gives it to private schools, right? How do you feel about book bans? Do you know how a book is either brought into our school library or taken out? What do you think about our budget and the fact that we still haven't met quality basic education standards for almost 18 years in Georgia, right? So I think all of these things are really incredibly important to ask those candidates, right? And yes, they are nonpartisan positions, but the way that we approach these issues with our values and also with the solutions that we bring to these positions are incredibly, incredibly important.
To your point, Coco, our values show up in our policies, right? And whether or not we are choosing candidates, what I say to people is you're not voting for a person, you're voting for a policymaker, right? And so it is important, as Ms. James and Coco indicated, that not only are you researching the candidates, but you understand the platform, the position, and the power they hold in that position to inform policy decisions that are going to impact your everyday living. How many bus routes, where the transportation is. We suffer in our community from, we don't have transit justice. We landlock most of our impoverished zip codes into essential jobs. Are we going to elect people on the school board or in judgeships or on our commissions or on our city councils that understand that and want to do something about it? Are we looking at those quality of life indicators around those policy positions and the values that the candidates are espousing? So I think primary elections give us the opportunity to do that in a very strategic way. And it is one of the best tools that we have in our community, and particularly low wealth communities of color, that allow us to advocate from self to system, right? And so it is a very powerful advocacy tool to utilize. And so I think one of the things that we want to underscore right off that Ms. James talked about is using that advocacy tool, right? and making sure that we're electing or selecting and participating in the process that drives us closer to those policy outcomes that make a difference in the quality of our life.
I mean, hearing all this, I want to go vote right now. So I'll put the question to everybody. How can I go do that? How can I vote right now? Are there any deadlines I need to know if I wanted to do that?
Of course you can vote right now, because in Georgia, our primary is May 24th. And so we are in the midst of early voting and absentee voting. Early voting is from May 2nd to May 20th. Absentee voting has started and ends on May 13th. So May 13th is the last day you can request a ballot. I do not recommend that because our mail system is extremely slow now here. And so the sooner, the better. But I want to say this. We have 200,000 people registered to vote in Georgia, in Chatham County alone. I think the challenge that we're having and the numbers that I've looked at, and hopefully they're higher by the time you guys all catch this, is that we're only trailing around 7,000 people who have actually voted. Around 2,000 some odd folks have actually requested absentee ballots. And so the challenge that we see now is folks know, or do they not know, but we need more people to exercise this form of advocacy, which is to vote. And if you don't have the information, there's so many resources from Step Up, from Black Voters Matter, to DEEP, to my organization that are providing you those deadlines, that are providing you the information that's on the ballot. But first and foremost, before we even get to voting, and yes, you can vote, make sure you're registered to vote, right? And so you can go on the Georgia website at mvp.sos.ga.gov or My Voter Page Georgia and look up where, one, if you're registered to vote, and two, where is your voting precinct? And then three, it'll also give you information about where you can early vote. And early voting is done outside of your voting precinct, which you traditionally do by your address. You can early vote in several different locations here in Chatham before May 24th. And I think one thing to really remember is that May 24th is not the day to vote. May 24th is the last day to cast your ballot in this primary election.
And to hop on what Amanda's saying, you can vote at here in Chatham County, early voting at the library, at Savannah Mall Library, the Civic Center, as well as the mosquito control office, and at our voter registration office out on Eisenhower. So there's quite a bit of locations that have access, and to Amanda's point, we have not been overrun by voters. So you can get in and out very quickly within a 10 to 15 minute time frame.
And the other thing to be aware of too, because I think there are actually 5 locations. The other is the Islands Library on Wilmington Island.
Sorry, I did forget.
Yes, and kind of going back to the absentee ballot process, which is something that I have really been very much concerned about since the new Georgia law has been passed, is having access to that absentee ballot application. It has not been easy because you do have to request it now, where in the past, if a person was disabled or a senior citizen, that application was automatically mailed to them. But with the new law, despite your age, despite your disability, you have to request the application. So if you don't have the application, you still have to request it. And then the deadline is this coming Friday, the 13th, and the voter registration office will accept it, but it has to be there by 6 p.m. So that is why Amanda said at this point in time, don't mail it in. But what we have discovered is that access to the ballot has been a challenge to most of our seniors, definitely to persons in low impact areas, because you don't have access to social media, you don't have access to technology, so you cannot download it. And if you do request it, you have to go in person to get a copy. If you are legally disabled. And if, for instance, you are outside of the county as a college student or maybe employed outside of the county, but Chatham County is still your legal place of residence, then someone can pick up the application for you. However, that person has to be a legal relative, and there's a list of who those relatives are, or they have to be a legal caretaker. So access to the absentee ballot has been not easy since the new law. And then even when you get the ballot, in reference to submitting your ballot, again, you have to do it individually. The drop
Right.
boxes, we only have 3 of them this time. They're inside the buildings. And so when you think of persons who may have even minor disabilities, you have to get out of your car, go inside the building, drop your absentee ballot, and then get back in your car, wherein before you could have just driven by like you would at the post office and just submitted your ballot in a box. So there are some restrictions that have come about because of the new law, which are a little bit disheartening and make it difficult. But if you do have to vote by absentee ballot, you only have a couple of days. And we just suggest that you do it as quickly as you can. But there are organizations who are willing to assist you with getting a copy of the ballot, faxing it or emailing it back for you once it's filled out, or even providing transportation to take you to submit it. And the same will be true for not only getting the application, but also once you get your absentee ballot. But by all means, vote early if you have that opportunity. On the 14th and the 15th of May, we have Saturday and Sunday voting that are still available. And this year, at least, both at the Civic Center and the voter registration office on Saturday, the 14th, they will be open from 9 until 5. And then the voter registration office will be open on Sunday from 9 until 5. So those are some other opportunities. But again, when you think about the hours, the times that they're open, and you go back and look at, I say our transportation systems, the work schedules that persons have, all of this, in my opinion, is prohibitive.
Yeah.
And it makes, it does cause our voters to say, well, how can I do this? I don't have time. I can't get here by this time or that time. So there are quite a few challenges, but we'll do the best we can. Let's try and do what we can to motivate persons to try and overcome those obstacles that are in the way.
Yeah, we have had more systematic barriers, I think, in the reintroduction of those systematic barriers. More in this time frame, we're seeing them at even greater levels, to all the points that Ms. James just made about, if I have to get a ride, I may have to wait till somebody gets off work and it's closed. And so I think the only way for communities to overcome systematic barriers or voter suppression, as it were, is to have overwhelming voter turnout. And so, in any way we can get help or assistance to someone to exercise their right. Even if you called in to Step Up, if we're not the place, we are willing to get you that information so that you and to assist you with getting where you need to go to exercise that right. And I know that the Tribune has published all of this information as well. It's on their website too. And so with When We All Vote, their information is also out there. So information is available and on social media outlets and so on. Amanda, was I stopping you from?
No, hopefully, like, we'll just roll into the next question and then I'll just talk about some things that we should prepare to be voters to do.
Yeah, so my next question was going to be, what do I need to bring when I go vote?
Perfect. Segue. First of all, it's proper identification, right? And making sure that identification matches whatever you use to register to vote. Things that will be scrutinized are addresses and signatures on this year's ballot, especially for those who are voting by mail. So you want to make sure that information is correct. And then one of the reasons why we do have lines at voting polls and people don't really realize that is lack of preparation. So I would say if you're voting Democrat this year, that ballot has about almost 40 questions. And so you really want to actually print ballots before you go, or at least try to get some services or some assistance to see your ballot. So it's not a surprise when you go in to vote, because that actually slows down the process for everyone to vote. So if you can, and have access to technology, or can call the same people who can give rides, I know the NAACP does that as well, are the same people can help you actually sort out what's on this ballot, or help you preview your ballot ahead of time, because there are on both sides, Democrat, Republican, on those two ballots, they're extremely long because they have they have large candidate pools on every election spot. And then they also have party affiliated ballot questions. And those I think on the Democrats is about 10. There's a couple more on the Republican side. And so those questions are asking you, how do you feel as the member of that party? And they're trying to basically take a survey or a poll. And so that's information ahead of time that you should also be familiar with before you go vote. So I am very big into, yes, go vote, but yes, be prepared as much as you can. Get that information out as soon as possible. Look at places like the Tribune, go on the Secretary of State's website, and then make sure you're informed about what's going to be on this ballot ahead of time. The second thing I really want to stress about proper preparation is to make sure you all have the phone number 866-R-VOTE. And that is the election protection line. And that is because if you have any issues from the website, the Secretary of State's website being down, from not being able to request an absentee ballot, from being fed the wrong information, from the machines not working, or a poll location opening late, you need to be able to call that number to report that to a series of volunteer lawyers who will then take your case and actually help you, like filter through what you need to do for next steps to make sure you can vote. And then also will probably end up being part of a larger, like, I guess we'll say brief about where the county or the state has failed voters on behalf of Georgia in this primary. So those are the things that we really want people to remember. Proper identification. Remember that there is a strong signature match. Remember that you need to try to at least look at your ballot or know some of those folks who are going to be on that ballot to speed up your process. You can take a copy of your ballot, of your sample ballot, into you when you go vote and have it pre-marked. Do not let them tell you you can't do that. You can do that. You can have a cheat sheet. And then on top of that, remembering that there is an election protection line for those who are disenfranchised during this voting process, which is 866-R-VOTE.
Let me back up with what Amanda just said and put in a plug for the Tribune. Actually, in this week's edition, we do have a full page which lists all of the candidates, Democrat, Republican, nonpartisan, all of the party questions. So if you pick up a copy or you go online to the SavannahTribune.com, you can get that information. So that's one form of information that's out there. And you can see all of the candidates, as I said before. It's not an endorsement at this point, but what we wanted to do, since this ballot was so heavily, I guess, so many people have said, oh my gosh, I haven't seen a ballot like this in a long time in the state of Georgia. So it's so full. You have so many candidates running for different positions, but at least you can look and you can see the questions. And the party questions will basically kind of tell you where the party platforms are going to be. So you can weigh one party against the other. The other thing to remember is that this is the primary election, but come November for the general election, you do not have to declare a party. You do not have to declare whether you're Democrat or Republican in the general election in November. But I would suggest that you look at that information, look at the party questions on both sides, so you can kind of understand where their platforms are. So the Savannah Tribune this week, we went on the streets today, but we're also online, and you can get that information there.
And we'll link to that on our social media.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I just wanted to say one quick thing before we move on to our specific questions, and we'll do that a little bit quicker. But I do just want to say, when you're voting in the state of Georgia for a primary, you're only selecting party preference. So my experience, my personal experience in the past, why I might have stayed away from primaries is where I'm from in Rhode Island, to go vote in the primary, you have to join a party. Here in Georgia, you don't have to join a party. You only select the preference, which party you wish to vote in their primary. Doesn't mean you're joining that party, doesn't mean you're getting signed up to get their emails or things like that. So don't think that that's a reason to not go vote, that you'll be lumped in with a party that you don't necessarily always feel you align with. It's just a preference in the primary. It doesn't mean you're joining that party, excuse me. So with that said, and with all this information, I want to just ask some targeted sort of quicker questions for people to respond, specifically as it intersects with your work. So Coco, I just want to start off with you. I know you're short on time. How, and I think you already talked a little bit about this, but how does this primary and nonpartisan general election sort of affect the work at the Deep Center, particularly with education?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I talked a little bit about that with the Recorder's Court and with the Board of Elections. There's also a primary for state House representatives and state Senate candidates, as well as, up the chain of state government. State House is incredibly important. We saw some really nasty bills this past legislative session, HB 1084, which specifically defines race and racism as divisive concepts, and also threw in a little anti-trans language in the end, just as a little. We saw SB 226, which basically is a book banning bill. We saw the introduction of a parents' rights bill, which, while seems like it would be pretty nonchalant on its hand, what it does is it gives parents the ability to basically restrict curriculum from classrooms, and not just for their child, for many other children. We saw a lot of voucher bills, and we also saw some really nasty justice bills attacking the bipartisan reforms that we have had and worked so hard for in the state of Georgia. Specifically SB 504, which would have made monetary bail mandatory for all 660 felony offenses in the state of Georgia. You do not have to be a mathematician to know that that is a terrible financial decision. And I know I want to be really quick, but I think also too, something that's really, really important for us to kind of communicate right now is that DEEP, specifically our community organizers, Apollo Johnson and Martina Yvette, are focusing on working with returning citizens, from the formerly incarcerated folks, to better understand rights restoration when it comes to voting. Chatham County has one of the highest rates of returning citizens in all of Georgia, and 1/3 of Georgians have a record. So that is 4.3 million people. Someone with a record, right? This is not an anomaly. And if you don't know someone, you are the exception, not the rule. And I will send over information for folks to know exactly how they can vote if they do have a record. But we need to be super clear. When someone completes their sentence, your right to vote is automatically restored and you can re-register and vote. If you're serving a felony first offender or conditional discharge sentence and the status hasn't been revoked, you can vote while serving that sentence. If you have outstanding monetary obligations, whether that's fines and fees or restitution, that does not keep you from voting if your sentence is complete. If you are serving a long probation sentence, you may qualify for early termination under a new law that was passed in May of 2021. And if you are serving probation on misdemeanor charges, or you are currently in jail for a misdemeanor offense, you can absolutely request an absentee ballot in jail, which is what we will be doing this fall. And last but not least, if you have been charged with a misdemeanor or a felony, but your case is awaiting trial, or you're pleading no contest, which basically means you accept the conviction without pleading guilty, you are able to vote. Do not let them tell you that you cannot. And there is so much misinformation and disinformation out there, specifically that just further stigmatizes and disenfranchises folks who have encountered the justice system.
Thank you. And that was going to be my other question for you. So I'm glad you're able to address that as well. Yeah, in rapid fire there. But definitely we will make sure to link to information because if you are watching this have been impacted by the justice system, or you know somebody that has, and that is very likely, make sure to get that information to anybody who could benefit from it. And now I want to turn to Ms. Hallwell, really talking about peer networks. How can we engage with other people to get them to go vote? Is this something that right now we should just do on social media? Are there better ways than that? Let us know.
No, call your mom, text your cousin, harass them, send them a reminder postcard, whatever it takes. It's not just social media, though. I know a lot of people receive their information from social media. We found here at When We All Vote that the best person to influence someone to go vote is their friends, family, or neighbor. You're the trusted voice in your community. You are the one who can actually move the needle with someone when you say, I really, really think it's important for you to go vote. And send friendly reminders. We do things like we have vote together events, which is basically like you hosting a house party or a virtual party to make sure all your friends and family are registered to vote, and then making sure everyone has a plan to go vote. I think one of the things that we're kind of we're skimming over, but I really want to like dial in on is that like nearly half, or like 46% of people who voted in Georgia are like young people of color. And that is so important. And that was a big number that turned out in 2020 for the election in Georgia. And actually they represent about 17% of our voting electorate is young people. And when I talk about young people, I just really want to be sure we're talking about those who are turning 18 all the way up to those who are under 30. This is a demographic that needs to be encouraged, that needs to be reminded. We read recently the Tufts Institute or Circles report on youth engagement, and most of the reasons why young people don't vote is because they're too busy with work or they forgot. And so a friendly reminder is always extremely helpful, and especially in races like Georgia, which are determined by such slim numbers. It is extremely important to be that annoying friend, family, or neighbor, to remind them in a gentle, caring way, are you registered to vote? Do you have a plan to vote? How can I support you in your voting endeavors or your voting journey? And that's just really, really important because so much is on the line here from our local levels all the way to our federal levels here in Georgia. And so just being that friendly reminder makes a huge difference in people's lives and their motivation to vote.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think we tend to rely on social media as our one avenue, but we've got a lot of tools available to us. I'm going to have my wife ask clients in her salon chair if they're registered to vote from here on out.
We work with a national partner called Shape Up the Vote, and they actually have a barbershop campaign where we put voter registration flyers with the QR code inside the barbershop or the salon, and people scan it and they find out where they need to go vote. It is that simple. It's really about community, right? Like when we build democracy, we're also talking about building community. And so being that responsible steward for those folks is extremely important and impactful.
Great. I love that idea. Now I'm just going to turn over to Ms. Johnson here. You sort of mentioned, we've sort of covered it a little bit, but just explicitly, what are the barriers for the low to moderate income community that might prevent them from voting, and how can we overcome them?
So much of that has been answered already, but I'll just underscore things that Coco Pappy mentioned and Ms. James mentions, and that Ms. Hollowell mentioned as well. In Savannah and Chatham County, in our particular county, we don't have countywide transportation. We don't have a lot of routes available for people. It is really inconvenient, for example, for a single parent who may have multiple children to get on a bus or find a ride, that if they're accessing or someone who doesn't have a car or a bicycle or is able to get there themselves and they're having to find a ride, then their ability to vote is being tied to someone who may be working and outside of the voter hours. the fact that we don't have good technology infrastructure in our community, as Ms. James mentioned. So people don't have access to internet and broadband. And a lot of times in low wealth communities, they may have a smartphone, but they have limited data, and it's hard to read on those. And then there's a significant amount of disinformation and opportunities to disengage them and disenfranchise them from the process with that misinformation. And so all of the things that we've underscored here that are systematic or structural barriers, to include the lack of information in the community. And so what Amanda mentioned is so important, is that it's not just us, it's the auntie who has a car, who can pick up 10 people and who can say, you better go vote, call her nephew or her, the cousins, and say, get in a car and we're all going to vote on this date. And so I think it's extremely important that we empower our networks and that we utilize them. Again, the only way to overcome all of the systematic barriers that we mentioned is to have overwhelming voter turnout. And so it's extremely important that people are educated about the process, that they know where to access information. But I also think it's even more important that those of us who are brought up to date or up to speed or have those connections, that we be willing to help the community access one of the most valuable rights and exercise the most valuable rights that they have in whatever means that we can, whether that's, giving them a gas card if they have to get a ride, or, I'll cash app you $5 so you can get to, go to vote. Whatever you can do, I think is it's most important.
Definitely. Now, I did have a question for Ms. James, but she's actually already addressed it as it related to a lot of the judges being on the ballot. But if you wouldn't mind just sort of framing that, with your work on the League of Women Voters, what's the impact there for female voters in particular?
Well, in reference to my relationship with League of Women Voters, I will just tell you that that particular organization, as well as sororities, fraternities, other community organizations, they're all nonpartisan. But when you look at the makeup, most of them are female. And so we have a coalition of those organizations where we work together. And our main emphasis is to try to get information out to the public and do what we can in reference to what we call door-to-door literature drops. Now, COVID has probably put some kind of restraints on a lot of door-to-door, person-to-person kinds of contacts and relationships. But the 2020 election showed what use of an absentee ballot could really do and how it could work. As a result of that, then here comes the new Senate Bill 202, which has put some restrictions on how to exercise that absentee ballot and how to use it. But I get back to the point where the organizations that have come together, it's like a coalition of organizations to get out to vote. And what we are trying to do is to get into every segment of the community and get as much information out as we possibly can. Being the publisher of the Tribune, that is something else that we have tried to do every week. If you have not been reading it, or if you have not been accessing it, there's the publisher's note or the publisher's box every week. We have had something in there about the absentee ballot, about early voting, even up when voter registration was going on. So we're trying to be that vehicle, one of the vehicles of information. We are currently the only African-American weekly newspaper in the area. So it does put a lot of responsibility on us. You're very short staffed, you have a small staff, but we do what we can to get that information out. This week, we have put some emphasis on the provisional ballot. And that's something else that we need to talk about, because there are new regulations now about how the provisional ballot can be used and when it can be distributed. So part of the new law now, if a person does not show up at their registered polling location and request a provisional ballot, in the past, they could request it, they could have used it, but they would still have until the following Friday to cure the ballot, which meant that whatever information was missing when they voted, they still had to go to the voter registration office on the following Friday before 5 o'clock, take whatever information it was that was missing, whatever proof, whether it was an address or an ID card or something like that, in order for the provisional ballot to actually be used and counted. This time, that provisional ballot will not be issued to anyone who shows up to a polling place other than they are registered until 5 p.m. So if you show up between 5 and 7 p.m. and you still have to have a reason, a legitimate reason as to why you cannot get to your official polling place, then you will be given a provisional ballot. But then you will also be instructed that you have to still come back on Friday to the voter registration office in order to cure the ballot or to get it at a point where it can be counted. So it's very important, as Amanda has said, that you plan to vote, that you understand and you know where your voting precinct is, because going back to what Ms. Johnson said, you think of these persons who don't have access to transportation. They can't get off from work, between these hours. So why would I take a provisional ballot and then I have to make time 3 days later to do something about it? That's 2 trips, 2 times that you have to go to exercise your right to vote. And so it's imperative that we help persons to understand, but that we help our constituents and our voters also know that there are organizations that are out there to assist them, especially with transportation or whatever it is that they may need to assist and help them to get where they need to go to exercise that right to vote. And we will continue in the Savannah Tribune to print the information and have the information there so that you'll know exactly what you need to do. But by all means, we ask persons to make a plan. And by all means, hopefully that plan will work around your schedule. Saturday voting works, but we do have persons who have to work on Saturdays. Some people have to work on Sundays. And depending on what your work hours or what your schedule is, none of these times may really fit into your schedule. So then you have that absentee ballot process, and you have the absentee ballot that you can use. But if you can't access the application, then what? So what we're trying to do, and I'm happy to be a part of this broadcast, is to make sure that we just get the information out and help persons to plan and help persons to understand that there are organizations who are willing to assist in every way to help them either vote by mail, which is the absentee ballot, early vote, or actually vote on election day.
Definitely. And thank you. Thank you to everybody for being here and answering these questions and getting this information out there to the public. As we wrap up, I just want to go around really, really quickly and just tell me the most important reason to go vote in this primary. So I'll start with Alicia, then Amanda, and then I'll finish with Ms. James.
Your vote is going to inform your quality of life. I think Ms. James underscored that tremendously in her earlier offering. You need to decide today how you and your children will live tomorrow. And so your vote is, in the words of one of our officials, our vote is a type of prayer about the world we want to live in, right? And when we all vote, we all are coming together to make a difference. And so you are voting not just for people, but for policy actions that are going to inform your life and generations of your family for years to come in your community. And it is the easiest way for you to advocate for yourself and for your family and for your children and for the legacy of your community. So it's an essential part of our everyday advocacy, and we should definitely be engaged in it.
Thank you. Over to you, Amanda.
I mean, you know, if we all don't vote, we don't create the change we want to see. So that's the very first form of advocacy. So vote, get engaged, try it out, and make sure you're staying active in your community and advocating for the things you want to see.
Thank you. And Ms. James?
Well, I just have to piggyback on what everyone has said, but your vote is the voice, is your voice. And it's the voice to the persons who are in position to make the decisions that affect your everyday life, that will affect what happens to your children in the next generation and the generations to come. So it's not just always about what's happening to me today, but what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's the way that you hold the persons accountable who are in the seats that make decisions that affect you every day, and your children and your relatives and your neighbors and your community. So exercise that right and let your voice be heard.
Thank you. And thank you all for, again, joining and being part of this discussion. It's definitely something that will continue because as we all know, it doesn't end on May 24th. We just get ready for the next election coming up in November. So thank you, and be on the lookout for that as well.